Okay. I love swimming. It's a little loud. Let me tell you why I have such a passion for swimming. It's not just because I'm an Aquarius, which makes me a water baby, but I use swimming as my most favorite form of exercise. I belong to the YMCA, and since 1980, I've been swimming like 2 to 3 times a week, and I just love it. When I'm swimming, I also use that time to de-stress, because in the water, I don't have time. I don't think about my bills. I don't think about the politics, all the arguments that are out there in the world. I just think about swimming. And it is my time for meditating. I listen to my breathing, the swishing of the water when I blow bubbles, the sounds that I make when I'm blowing bubbles. And that's very, very calming. I count my strokes. So it is so very essential for me to have all these things to de-stress and to meditate. Also, as a creative writer, I use swimming as an opportunity to come up with some very interesting stories. So sometimes if I'm trying to work out a story or come up with a new story, I might kind of think about things as I'm doing my laps. So when COVID came and the pools were closed for like a year, I was pretty insane, along with all my friends who I met, many friends swimming also, because you kind of get to know all the people who swim at the same time. I was like a fish out of water, becoming extremely desperate towards the end, where I started thinking, oh my, maybe Wisconsin was a little more liberal and I could rent a hotel room. I started calling around to see if anyone's pools were open so I could go somewhere else. And then the Y did finally open, but with major restrictions. We couldn't use the locker room, and we couldn't shower or change there. They put little curtains up on the deck so we could change if we wanted to, but it was kind of cold, and we had to go out with our wet hair. Some people just threw their clothes over their wet bathing suits. We were desperate, but we were glad to be able to swim. But let me tell you the real big reason why I'm so passionate about swimming. It's because when I swim, I have a major connection with my mother. My mother was an amazing swimmer, and if it hadn't been for this fact, I wouldn't be here today, because it was her amazing ability to swim that saved her life during the Holocaust. Now, excuse me, my mother lived in Budapest, Hungary, and it was during World War II. Her story that she finally told me, the entire story as an adult, occurred like at the very, very end of the war. So it's like the Russians came in and liberated the Hungarians, and this is the end of December. And my mother had spent many, many months trying to go from place to place. People were hiding so they weren't deported to the concentration camps. She had managed to get that far. She and her sister and a friend and a number of other people were hiding in a basement apartment building, and like I said, it was kind of like the last week of the war when somebody tipped off the police and told them about their hiding place, and they were all arrested and brought to the local jail. My mother explained that these were the Arrow Cross, which were the bad Hungarian police, the Nazi affiliated ones. So her friend had said, when they were in the jail that evening, he said, well, this is bad, because what's going to happen is we're going to be lined up, and there's going to be a firing squad. And they're going to take us to the Danube, because they were like right there on the Danube River. So the only way we possibly maybe escape is if I give a signal, we all run and jump into the river, and that might save our lives. So the next morning, they took everyone's shoes, so everyone's barefoot, hands tied behind their backs. They marched them from the jail to the Danube, the banks of the Danube. Now, it's December, there's snow, ice, broken glass and debris from all the fighting that had occurred, and they walked them to the river. My mother said she was wearing a black dress at the time. This is a little bit important. So they lined them up on the firing spot. Her friend gave the signal. She and her sister and him and I don't know who else ran to the river and jumped in. Now, my mother's sister was never seen again, nor was her friend, his friend. My mother received a bullet that grazed her back, missing her spine by inches, but she had a huge bullet hole in her thigh from a bullet that went in, and as it went in, it took some of the material from her dress as well. And she jumped in the Danube, which was cold, obviously, because it's winter, which is probably a good thing because it kept her from hemorrhaging and would stop, her from bleeding from the bullet holes. And she managed to swim far enough away that, they shot at everybody, but she didn't get any more shot at. And then she managed to get back to the side. And she waited there for a while till things quieted down and waited to hear if she could hear anyone who could help her, who could rescue her. And she said that she finally heard voices. There's a number of bridges in Budapest, and the one she was closest to was the Elizabeth Bridge. And she heard these voices overhead, decided she had to take a chance. Hopefully it would be the good police. And it was, and she called up and said she needed help, that she was down there. They said they'd send a rope, but she said, I don't have my hands, I can't use my hands. So they said, well, put them in your teeth, we'll pull you up by your teeth. Now my mom was 19, very thin at that point, because there was hardly any food to go around. So I saw pictures, she looked pretty thin, maybe, I don't know if she was 90 pounds, but she was thin. They managed to pull her up, and it was an interesting detail. I'll just add this because she did have false teeth, and she explained to me that her teeth, because I guess they had been so loose that she ended up losing them and had to have false teeth later in her life. So that's kind of how I found out that later in life. But anyhow, so they pulled her up, they brought her to a makeshift hospital where they were treating Jewish people, and the doctor said, it looked really bad, that he had to take the bullet out and the material that had gone in. They didn't have, it wasn't a very sterile situation there, but he said he might have to cut her leg off. She's like, no, I don't want, do everything you can to save it. No general anesthesia, but they did operate and they got the bullet out, and she stayed there for, I don't know how long, a little while, short while. She told me she was the youngest patient, so everyone was really kind to her, and they kind of treated her special. But when she was strong enough to leave, they found her a home. All I know is a woman named Margit took care of her, and they brought her to Margit's apartment, who nursed her back to health enough that she could go then, by the end of the war then, it was over, so she could leave and try to find her whatever relatives were still alive. And she told me for months she couldn't use her fingers, no small things. She couldn't do buttonholes or things like that because of the way her hands had been tied. So that was a long time. So what I wanted to tell you was that when I was 60, I was lucky enough to take a trip with my temple to Eastern Europe, and we went to Budapest. We went to the place on the Danube where these things occurred. And there is a memorial there called the Shoes on the Danube Bank Memorial, and I printed out from the internet, so I will leave it on the side. And there's a little bit of information about it on the second page. You can look at it if you're interested. And it was very moving because they have all kinds of shoes. I don't know if they're what they're made out of, copper, brass, something, I'm not sure. But they're women's shoes, men's shoes, little kids' shoes. It's a very moving. Excuse me. And as you see, there's a bridge in the back, which is the Elizabeth Bridge. So swimming is a way that I remember my mom, and I feel very close to her when I swim, and I'm very grateful to be alive. And so swimming is like my life. So I wanted to share that with you. Thank you.